Okay, Shir is being recorded. And the topic we're going to be talking about today is, as the title says, Beyond the Pale. Is Teshuvah really for everyone? And or does Teshuvah really work for everyone? And the question is a fundamental question, and that is, are there things that people can do that are so bad that Teshuvah is not an option anymore, that Teshuvah won't work, that whatever they do, they won't be able to make things right? So this is the question we're going to be trying to answer today. And there are a number of ways I'm going to try to approach this question, both through examining averos that people do against Hashem, what I'll call spiritual sins, and also things that people do against other people, or interpersonal crimes. So I'll differentiate between those two things, and we'll see if we can come to any sort of conclusion by the end of this. But first of all, we'll talk about Teshuvah itself. What is Teshuvah? So Teshuvah goes back to the Torah. There's a pasuk in Bamidbar, which says as follows: Ish o isha ki ya'asu mikol chatos ha'adam. When a man or a woman does any of the sins that people can do, l'ma'ol ma'al b'Hashem, any transgression against God, v'ashma ha'nefesh, and that person is guilty, v'hisvadu es chatasam asher asu. They should do vidui, they should do some sort of confession about the sins that they've done. And this is brought down in the Sefer HaChinuch, many other places, but the Sefer HaChinuch writes, Sefer HaChinuch, an anonymous work written sometime in the 13th century in the form of a letter from a father to the son. The son was just turning bar mitzvah, and the father writes this long letter to his son. This letter includes 613 mitzvahs. He's writing to his son that now you're about to become bar mitzvah, you're about to turn 13. You're going to have to start to keep most of these mitzvahs. So I'm going to write to you and tell you exactly what all the mitzvahs are. The Sefer HaChinuch includes Teshuvah, doing this video, this confession, as one of the mitzvahs. Shinitz davinu lehisvados lefnei Hashem. We are commanded to do this confession before God, al kol hachataim shechatanu, for any sins that we've done, ba'es shenisnachem alehem, at the time that we feel guilty about them, and the time that we regret them, and that's going to be an important line we'll come back to later. That the person should mention the sins they've done explicitly and with their mouth, not just thinking about it, not just meditation, but explicitly mentioning these averas out loud. Vivakesh kapara alav, and it should ask for forgiveness. V'yarich b'davar, and should increase, should do this as much as they can. Kafi mashi etzachos l'shano, according to the ability of every person's tongue. So however much a person can do to talk about and to think about and to actually formulate, I did this wrong and I feel terrible and I did it in this place and in this way. The Sefer HaChinuch is telling us this is a mitzvah in the Torah, that the person has to do this whenever they do any averas. Rambam in Hilchos Teshuvah gives us a little bit more and expands on this mitzvah. It says, Ezohi Teshuvah Gemura. It says, what is complete Teshuvah? And this really gets to the core, the fundamental of what Teshuvah is actually all about. It says, so how do we know when a person has done complete Teshuvah? At what point does a person know that they've really internalized this process and changed and become a new person? Zeh sheba liado davar she'avarbo. You have to imagine that a person has the ability to do the same sin that they've once done. Ve'efshar biyado la'aso, so and they can do it again. Operash v'lo asa mipnei hatshuva, but they separated themselves and they didn't do it because of the tshuva that they've done. Lo miyira v'lo mikirshlan koach, and not because they're afraid of the punishment, and not because they don't have the strength anymore. Rather, they decide not to do the same sin a second time because they've done this process of change, and that's the reason why they're not doing the mitzvah again. Kate gives an example of how this works. If somebody slept with a woman in sin, and after a certain time he's again in solitude with her again, and he still loves her, he still has all his strength, he's in the same country that he did sin once before, but he doesn't do it, and he doesn't do the sin, that is a complete Baal Teshuvah. So he had the ability to do the same sin he once did. He does this process, he changes himself, and he doesn't do it the second time. That is a Baal Teshuvah Gemura, a complete Baal Teshuvah. Umahi HaTeshuvah, Rambam continues, what is Teshuvah? It's when a person rejects, when the sinner rejects their sin, visiro mimachshavto, and throws it out of their mind, v'yigmor belibo, and commits in their own heart, they'll never do it again. And they also feel bad about what they once done before. And God will testify in this person that they'll never do the same sin again. So again, same kind of idea that Teshuvah is not just about saying sorry. It's not just about apologizing for what one has done. It's a real transformative process that changes a person into the kind of person who would never do the same Teshuvah again. Rambam continues, whoever says the words that I did this sin and I've done this wrong, but doesn't commit in their own heart to stop doing the sin, it's similar to somebody who goes into a mikvah while holding a sheret. A sheret is a small animal that contains, that makes a person tameh. So if a person goes into the mikvah while holding a sheret, going into the mikvah does absolutely nothing for them. Similarly, Rambam is saying that if somebody does the vidur, if somebody does the confession, but doesn't commit in their own heart to never do the sin again, it doesn't really work. It doesn't do anything for them. Next halach in the Rambam, midarke hatshuva, and this is really fundamentally, midarke hatshuva, it's of the ways of tshuva, lios hashav soek tamid lifnei Hashem, that a person doing this process should cry and scream before God constantly, bivkiu v'tachanunim, with crying, with different prayers, voset tzedakah kfi kocho, should give as much tzedakah, as much charity as they're able to, umisrachek harbe min hadavar shechatabo, and should distance themselves as much as they can from the thing they've once done, from the avera they once did, umishana shmo, and to change their name. What is changing one's name have to do with tshuva? Kilomar, because it's as if they're saying, Ani acher ve'eni osa ha'ish she'asa osan hamasin, that I am a different person and not the same person who did those actions. And to me, these four halachos in Rambam really get to the heart of what tshuva is all about, because there's a really important question asked in Hilchos Tshuva, and that is, why should tshuva work? A person does an avera, and then attempts to apologize for it, make amends, and do whatever they can to make things right. But the fact is, at one point, they actually did the sin. So they can say sorry from today till tomorrow until the cows come crying home, but at the end of the day, they did it, and there's no changing the past. The person can't rewind the clock and go back and somehow erase the sin that they've done before. So what's the process of tshuva? What's its mechanism? And I think what Rambam is saying here is that what a person can't change the past. It's true. And once something is done, it's done, and that's it. But what can you do now? You can change yourself into a new person who would never have done the sin in the first place. And oftentimes when dealing with people who've done things that hurt other people, it's true that they can't take the hurt away. They can't really, they can't go into the past and fix what they've done in that way. But what they can do is they can work on themselves and change themselves into the kind of person that would never do it. And sometimes that knowledge that the person who did this bad thing, the person who hurt you in a certain way, will never do it to someone else, is a little bit of a comfort. And it's in a way not exactly fixing, but moving forward in a way that we can understand what tshuva is all about. To me, that's what Rambam is saying here, that tshuva is not about fixing the past, but about rectifying the present, to making sure that the mistakes that you made at one point in the past will never happen again. And when one goes to God and talks to God about this, and God can confront such a person and say, why did he do X, Y, and Z? If this person went through that transformative process and changed into a new person, then they can say, look, I don't know who did that sin, but I would have never done it. And now I'm in a place where it's not possible for me to have done that sin, and therefore you shouldn't punish me for doing the sin, because me as a person, as the way I am right now, could not have done it. And it doesn't make sense to punish a person for something they literally could not have done. So in terms of understanding the mechanism of tshuva, it's not just a sorry. It's not just, oh, I hope you forgive me for anything I might have done over the past year or whatever it is. But it's a real transformative process of change. And to me, this is what tshuva is all about. So let's talk about this. Is it possible for someone to do something so bad that they no longer have access to this process? So Mishnah and Yoma, the bottom source on page 1, says the following. It says, Averos shebein adam lemakom, that if a person does sins against the makom, against God, Yom HaKippurim mechaper. Then Yom Kippur can atone for them. Now, Yom Kippur in this context, to me, the way I understand is Yom Kippur is here used as a catch-all for the best possible tshuva process. A person goes to Yom Kippur and really engages in this process of self-reflection and self-change and truly emerges as a different person. If a person does the top level of tshuva and can say that they would be a Baal Tshuva Gemura, a complete Baal Tshuva, that if they were presented with the option to do the sin again, they genuinely would not do it again, then that will atone for sins done against God, spiritual sins. However, avero sheben adam machavero, but sins that a person did against other people, interpersonal crimes, ein yom kippur mechaper. This elevated form of tshuva will not atone for that sin. Until what? Until sheyirate es chavero, until they appease the friend that they've hurt, until they actually go to that person and attempt to make things right. And only once a person does that, if a person hurts someone else and then tries to do tshuva, but before he does that, he has to go to that person and try as much as he can to rectify the wrong, to return the stolen good, to make sure the friend is doing okay, whatever it means to appease the friend, that's what a person has to do. And only then can any tshuva process affect any form of atonement for the person through this process, either through Yom Kippur or through this intense tshuva process. So it seems to be there's some ways where tshuva wouldn't help, because there's more to the story than I mentioned before. Yes, a person can do all they can to change themselves, but if they haven't done the work and fixing it for the other person, that could be a serious problem. On to the next source, in the Bavli, onto page number 2, Bava Basra 88b. And this is just remarkable teaching in the Gemara. I think it's very timely, very important, and really goes to the heart of what that Mishnah was talking about. Rabbi Levi says, Rabbi Levi says, Kashe onsham shel midos, yoter me onshan shel arayos. That here, onshan shel midos are sins of measurements. What are sins of measurements? They are quite literally having incorrect weights and measures. If a person, back in the time of the Gemara, time of the Torah for sure, the way they used to conduct business was by weighing weights in the marketplace, and by that determining how much certain items of food cost. The same thing we do here, just with modern technology. And so what Rabbi Levi is saying here, that it's worse, that doing averos with weights and measures, having dishonest measurements, cheating in business, is worse me onshan shel arayos, from sins that deal with arayos. Arayos are all sorts of sexual immorality that the Torah talks about. Sins done that are immoral in business are worse than all of the sex crimes in the Torah. Why? The Gemara goes on to say, the hasam efshar b'tshuva, because there, with the sins of the weights and measure, of the sins of arayos, sins of sexual crimes, it's possible to do tshuva. But here, lo efshar b'tshuva, it's not possible to do tshuva. So it's possible to do tshuva for things which are the worst possible sins imaginable. This is one of the top three that a person has to give their life for. But nevertheless, in that case, a person can do tshuva for it. But cheating in business and stealing, that a person can't do tshuva for. So Tosfos explains this Gemara, and he limits it a little bit, but he brings out the point very beautifully. What does he say? He says, "V'dafka ba'arayos she'ein bahen mamzerus," and specifically talking about these sexual crimes where there's not going to be a mamzer, where no child was born. Because if there's a mamzer, clearly you've wronged another person in a very serious way. You've ruined the person's entire life. And if you've done the sin in the way where you've created a mamzer, that's absolutely terrible. And that's for sure included in the averos that you cannot do tshuva for. Aval, however, he says, if somebody sleeps with a married woman, beholid mimena, and she has a child, then she has a son, Oshar Rayos, or any of the other relationships which are asr and they produce a child, that is a twist, that is a deep, terrible sin that's not possible to fix. And in that case also, it's not possible to do tshuva. However, a dissenting opinion in Tosfos, for Rav Chaim Omer, Rav Chaim was one of the students of Rabbeinu Tam, and according to Professor Reiner, was one of the greatest students of Rabbeinu Tam. He has a dissenting opinion here, and he says, even though it twists in an unfixable way, if it's not possible to fix it, there's still a possibility of doing tshuva. Tosfos continues in the previous vein, aval gazlan, but someone who steals, shechuvasahu sheyachzir hagzela. The part of the tshuva process is returning what they've stolen. The hecha de gazel rabim, and if somebody steals from the public, somebody cheats in business, and many people could come through a person's store and don't necessarily know who they are. Eino yodea lemid yashiv. A person will not know who to return the stolen goods to, and therefore it's not possible to do tshuva. So Rambam brings this down and formulates it very clearly. He says, Arba be'esrim dvarim me'akvin es tshuva. There are 24 things which prevent a person from doing tshuva. And one of the 24, if somebody shares something stolen with the thief, since the person doesn't know who the items belong to, will never be able to return them, therefore will never be able to do tshuva, because as we said before, part of doing tshuva for interpersonal crimes is making the crime right, with making things right with the person you've wronged. And if you do wrong things for people who you'll never be able to meet again, that's a serious problem that you'll never be able to fix. So maybe there's some kinds of sins which one can't really do tshuva for. And the Gemara does discuss some ways that if a person doesn't know who they've stolen from, how do they fix it? One of the solutions the Gemara gives is that if you've stolen from the public, then donate that money to things which help the public, and other kinds of solutions. But maybe there's some kinds of things which are so terrible or so far removed from the victim that it's not possible to do tshuva for those things. That's suggestion number one. I want to move on to a specific example in the Gemara and see if this has any application beyond this Gemara. So, very famous character in the Talmud, his name was Elisha ben Avuya. And Elisha ben Avuya was one of the Tanaim, one of the rabbis of the Mishnah. And he basically went completely irreligious, rejected religion entirely, and nevertheless knew a lot of Torah. And another rabbi of the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir, even though his Rebbe, Elisha ben Avuya, went completely off the path and totally rejected Judaism, still learned as much Torah as he could from him. It's a very strange and interesting story. And the Gemara in Chagiga, next source on the sheet, tells a story about this relationship, this very strange relation of Rabbi Meir learning Torah from this very strange individual and very strange character. The Gemara's term for Elisha ben Avuya, they don't usually call him by his name, they actually call him Acher, which means the other one. So they're so against Elisha ben Avuya that they don't even want to say his name. They call him Acher, another person, like a word of denigration. So the Gemara tells a story about these people. Maaseh ba'acher. There's a story about Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. Shahaya rochev al hasus b'Shabbos. He was riding a horse on Shabbos, which, according to the rabbis, you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to ride on your horse on Shabbos. V'haya Rabbi Meir mahalich acharav. Nevertheless, Rabbi Meir was walking after him to learn Torah from his mouth. So while Acher is violating Shabbos, Rabbi Meir still doesn't want to reject his teacher entirely. He wants to learn the Torah that he has to teach him. He's following him and he's learning Torah. Amar lo. And so at a certain point, Acher tells Rabbi Meir, Meir, my student Meir, Chazor la'acharacha, you have to turn around now. Shegabar shi'arti be'ikvei susi ad kan tchum Shabbos. Because the heels of my horse are just about to cross the tchum Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's a certain amount of distance that a person is allowed to walk beyond a clearly defined city, and they were about to reach that point. And this is the Torah that Acher is teaching Rabbi Meir as he's violating that very halacha at that very moment. Remarkable story. So Amar lo, so Rabbi Meir tells him, you also should come back. You should follow me as well. Stop violating Shabbos and come back, because potentially going outside the Tchum might already be a doraisa, might be a Torah violation. So Rabbi Meir is trying to do kiruv on his own Rebbe and says, come back, return. And maybe even the words here, I'm just thinking about this now off the top of my head, that the word chazor bach, return now and come back with me, has deeper implications than just turn around from the Tchum on Shabbos, but return with me back to Torah Judaism. Very profound line here. So Amar lo, Acher replies back to Rabbi Meir, says, look, I've already told you that Kavar Shemati me'achori hapargod, I've already heard from beyond the veil, whatever that means, some prophetic, some Ruach HaKodesh, some divine message. Shuvu banim shovavim. He quotes a pasuk here. return rebellious children. That the Pargod that has said this pasuk that everybody can rebel, all rebellious children can return. Crucial two words, chutz me'acher, except for acher. Everybody has the ability to do tshuva except for acher. So clearly the Gemara is telling us that there is at least one person in history who went so far beyond the pale that they weren't able to do tshuva anymore. And a lot of the Mefarshim deal with this, and really maybe that line was only set to test him, and really he could have done tshuva, and there are other suggestions offered as well. But nevertheless, we have this, at least in the simplest reading of the Gemara, there's a Talmudic reference to someone who did some things that were so bad that they completely went beyond the pale. Now, Rambam, back in Hilchos Teshuvah, chapter 6, last source on sheet 2, he also says something similarly in this vein, and brings it a little bit closer to home, a little bit more relevant to our daily life. He said, Kishem sheha'adam chote midato v'ritzarno, in the same way that a person sins not with knowledge and with intention, that a person does a sin knowledgeably and intentionally, kachu oset tshuva midato v'ritzarno, so too he has to do tshuva intentionally and with his will. And he continues, he says the following, V'efshar adam chet gadol. It's possible for a person to do a sin so great, or chatayim rabim, or many sins, many different sins, anshe yitin hadin lifnei dayan ha'emes, until the judgment is passed by the dayan ha'emes, by God. And dayan ha'emes, of course, is a very sad way of referring to God, the true judge, which we tell people when they're mourning, Baruch dayan ha'emet, blessed is the judge of truth, blessed is the true judge. So it's possible that a person can do so many sins that the dayan ha'emes, the true judge, will make the judgment, that he will get the following punishments. What punishment will this person get for doing so many sins? Shimon in mimenu hatshuva, that he will remove the possibility of tshuva from this person. The ein manichin lo reshus lashuv, will not give him permission to do tshuva. May rish, because of this person is so wicked. So that this person should die and be destroyed in the sin that they've done. And therefore, Kasav Batorah, it says in the Torah, Vani akshes leif paro, I have hardened Paro's heart. And that's how Rambam answers this question. Since to Rambam, it's a fundamental principle that every person has total free will and can do whatever they want at any time. What does the Torah mean when God said he hardened Paro's heart? Rambam explains because Paro did things that were so bad, and sometimes other people can do things that are so bad as well, that Hashem literally removes the ability for these people to do tshuva, removes their free will, and that's the punishment. The punishment is that the free will for doing tshuva is removed, and the person will die as a result of their sin. Rambam continues, he did the sin on his own initially, from his own free will, Yisrael hagarim ba'artzo, and did wicked things to the Jews who were living in his land. Natan hadin, so the judgment came, limnoa hatshuva mimenu, that he wouldn't anymore have the ability to do tshuva ad shenifra mimenu, until he got the punishment. So God wanted to punish Paro, didn't want Paro to have the ability to do tshuva and maybe circumvent the punishment that would have happened. So therefore Hashem said, I will let you sink so far in your sin, I'm going to remove your ability to do tshuva. And that's the punishment that you get for doing these terrible sins in the first place. So it seems to me that Rambam here is talking about the colloquial Hitlers of the world, the people who do really terrible things. There's no question that Paro, the way he's described in the Chumash, is a Hitler-type character, someone who's doing things that are so terrible, unimaginably terrible. Even especially if we look at the Midrashim, the kinds of things he was doing, having Jewish children plastered into the walls of buildings they were building, another really horrible thing, throwing children into the river, terrible things. That when we're dealing with people who do such horrible things, they can reach a point where they no longer are able to do tshuva. And it makes some sort of intellectual sense as well. A person's psychology can only take so many hits before they reach a point of no return. They kind of reach a point where they are so steeped in whatever terrible things they're doing that they no longer can change at least back to a normal place where they should be. But this is about the paros of the world. Nevertheless, this idea was so objectionable that Yosef Albo, who lived in the 15th and 14th centuries, can't even agree with Rambam that the paros of the world have no free will to do tshuva. So says Rabbi Yosef Albo in Sefer HaIkarim. Sefer HaIkarim he wrote as a book to try to define the fundamental principles of the Jewish religion. And he basically makes the point that Rambam has a list of 13 principles. And there are a few other lists of fundamental Jewish beliefs as well. And Yosef Albo makes the point that if you want to say that we're only mentioning the categories of Jewish necessary beliefs, then 13 is way too many. There aren't 13 categories of things that Jews have to believe. And if you want to say that they're including everything that a Jew has to believe, the list is far too short because there should be way more than 13. So the book Sefer HaIkarim, the book of fundamentals, is about this question. What are the categories of Jewish belief? And he decided that there were three. Number one, belief that there's a God. Number two, belief in reward and punishment. Number three, belief that the Torah is a divine revelation. And that's the structure of the book. The first book discusses all three in general specifics, and then he has three additional parts 2, 3, and 4, where he discusses them more specifically. So in the part about the divine origin of the Torah, he talks about Teshuvah as well. And this is from chapter 4, part 4, chapter 45. And this is what he says, the first source on page 3. Harasha b'ba'alav hamaka. When a wicked person gets punished, when a wicked person gets hit from God, hu mitchaseh, this person will make himself righteous. Vishav el Hashem, and then will return to God. That's natural. When a person does things wrong and then they're punished, they recognize the reason why they're being punished, and then they change their ways and they return to God. Why? Meyiras ha'onesh hamutal alav, because of the fear of the sin that's been placed on this person. Kemosha Amar Paro, and this is what Paro says, and now he quotes from the same story that Rambam was quoting. Chatasi hapam, that this time I've done a sin. Hashem atzadik, and God is righteous. Uba'avur shezeh hapal domala ones ve'eno b'chiri'i, and since this action of tshuva, it seems like it's been forced. It's similar to a forced action and isn't really part of his free will. That if every time we did sins and got punished for them, immediately we would do tshuva, and that would only be a natural process in the same way that a person pulls their hand back from a burning fire. So Hine Hashem Yisbarach mechazek es libo. So therefore Hashem has to strengthen the person's heart. Kishenosein lo tzad o tzadim, to give them either one way or several ways. Liklos behem hamaka, to give them the punishment, so that the person will be able to take the punishment, vilomar, and also be able to justify sheba b'mikra v'lo outside ha'ashgacha elokis, that this punishment came by coincidence and not through direct intervention by God. So the natural way of the world is that when a person gets punished when they've done things wrong, naturally they should make the connection on their own. So what does Hashem have to do to keep this person in line with their own free will and to make sure they're doing tshuva, not because they're afraid of the sin, but because they genuinely want to change? Then he has to strengthen this person's heart. And that's how he explains what Hashem did to Paro. It wasn't that it was a punishment, that because Paro did things so bad that Hashem had it out to get Paro and to make Paro sink as far as he could and completely destroyed in his own sin. No, he wanted to, the opposite. It was in some sense a blessing. He wanted to preserve Paro's free will. And that's why Hashem had to strengthen Paro's heart. Rabbeinu Yonah, the next source in the sheet, in the beginning of Shari Teshuvah, also mentions this topic, doesn't talk about Paro, but he talks about the ability of Teshuvah for anybody to do Teshuvah for anything. He says, Minatovos asher heitiv Hashem yizbarach im beroav, that one of the good things that God did for his creations, ki hachin lehem haderach la'alos mitoch pachos maseim. He's given them an ability, God gave people the ability to elevate themselves, to emerge from the lowest of their actions. V'im hirbu lipshoa, if a person does a lot of sins, v'lim rod, and to rebel, v'bagad bogdim bagdu, and to do terrible things against God, lo skar ba'adam dalse tshuva. Even so, the doors of tshuva have not been closed because of those terrible averos. A person always has the ability to do tshuva. Shenemar, as it says in the Torah, and he quotes here the same pasuk that Acher quoted in the Gemara above, Shuvu banim shovavim. You should return all the rebellious children should return. And to me, that choice of pasuk is not an accident. He's saying implicitly here that even though Acher believed that he was an exception, it's not true. No matter what a person does, no matter how bad, Teshuvah is always an option, and a person can always return from Teshuvah. Rambam has a similar formulation where in the end, Rambam kind of came back and went in this line of thinking. And this is a part of a halacha that we've seen before in the sheet. It says, there are 24 things which prevent a person from doing tshuva, and Rambam has this long list that lists all 24 things that prevent tshuva for one reason or another. And it's a very interesting list, the way he categorizes each one. But nevertheless, he ends that chapter with the following line. It says, Kol elu hadvarim b'chayetz bahen, all the things I've mentioned and anything similar to them, even though they prevent, they block, they make it more difficult to do tshuva, they don't remove the possibility entirely. But if a person is able to overcome and do tshuva from them, this person can still become a Baal Tshuva, and they will still have a portion in the world to come. So at the end of the day, it seems to be that really as much as a person can sin, and all as terrible as they are, and remember, we're talking about the proverbial Hitlers of the world. So we're talking about Paro. We're talking about people who've done really, really bad things. It's very hard, and it's very improbable, and it's as close to impossible as it could possibly be. But nevertheless, the way of tshuva, the ability and the opportunity to do tshuva is never closed off entirely. It's always possible, in theory, for a person to come back and attempt to do tshuva. So to bring this up, there are two more sources that I want to mention, and Rambam mentions this 3 times in total in Hilchos Tshuva entirely, and I think this is really, at the end of the day, Rambam's genuine opinion about tshuva. And so in Hilchos Tshuva chapter 3, that's where Rambam talks about a lot of the fundamental ideas of the Jewish religion. That's where he talks at great length about the 13 principles of faith. And he also talks about the world to come, how a person can lose their share in the world to come. He says the following. He says, Elohein she'ein lehem chilek l'olam haba. These are the people who have no share in the world to come. El nichrasin, they are cut off. Be'ovdin, they are lost or destroyed. V'nidunin al godel risham. V'chatasam, they are judged according to the greatness of their wickedness and their sins. La'olam ul'olme olamim, forever and ever and ever. They are forever judged and they have no share in the world to come, but they're cut off forever. And he gives a whole list of things, and one of them mentioned on the list is shovchei damim, is murderers, that these people have no share in the world to come, but many others as well. And he ends that chapter again with the following line. This is really important. He says, "Bamed dvar mamurim." What does it actually mean? When does it actually apply? Shekol echad me'elu ein lo chilek l'olam haba. That all of these people don't have a share in the world to come. When does that actually apply? Kishemes b'lo tshuva. That's only when they die without having ever done tshuva. Aval, however, im shav me'risho umeis, if they first do tshuva from their wickedness and then they die, v'hu bal tshuva, and they become a bal tshuva. And it's that process that we mentioned before of not just saying sorry, of not just apologizing, but becoming the kind of person who would never do the sin in the first place. Now that's a very tall order, especially for people steeped in such wickedness. Nevertheless, if they actually do that process, this person is among the people who have a share in the world to come. Essential line, there's nothing that can stand in the way of tshuva. Even if a person denied fundamental ideas about Judaism their entire life, and in the last day, shav, that's when they decided to do tshuva, they still have a share in the world to come. All the evil and wicked people and anyone similar, if they do tshuva, whether in public, whether in private, they are accepted. Even though they are still rebellious. Why? In what sense are they still rebellious? Because they repented in private and not in public. Mikablin also b'tshuva. They are still accepted with their tshuva. So tshuva works for everyone. And again, it's not just a simple apology. It's really a very serious process, as Rama defined earlier. And he says this 2 more times, and I just want to bring this point home, and then we'll finish this up. But he says, "Hatshuva mechaperes al kol ha'avirus." Tshuva can atone for everything. Afilu rasha kol yamav, even if a person was wicked every day of their life, va'asa tshuva b'achrona, but they did tshuva at the end of their life. Ein maskirin lo shum davar mirisho. They don't mention a single thing of their wickedness. And finally, afilu avar kol yamav, even if a person did sins their entire life, va'asa tshuva v'yom misaso, and did tshuva on the day that they died, umeis b'tshuvaso, and they died as they were doing tshuva, kol avonosav nimchalin, all their sins will be forgiven. So, of course, what this really means is that a person always has the ability to change themselves. It doesn't mean that if people do wicked things and then say that they're sorry, that they've repented, that they've done, that they call themselves Baalei Tshuva, that we necessarily have to accept that or forgive them or treat them as if they're genuinely different people. But what Rambam is saying here is that no matter how far a person thinks they've fallen, no matter how far or how lost the person thinks they are, there's always the potential to change, to engage in this process, to become the kind of person who'd never do the things that we've done wrong before. And to me, that's a very hopeful note, that this the process of tshuva is never completely out of the question, that it's always there as a possibility. And even people who do really bad things potentially have the process and the ability to genuinely become better people. And to me, that's a very hopeful thought heading into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And again, as I said before, I really appreciate everyone coming. If anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them, either on Zoom or in person. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, what was the deal with changing the name? So Rambam says that one of the ways of tshuva is to change a person's name. And what's the point? Because a person, by changing the name, is effectively saying, I feel like I'm a completely new and different person. And this is the general theme of tshuva in general. You're not just apologizing, you're changing yourself into a completely new human being. So if a person changes their name, first of all, other people treat them differently. I remember when I was in 6th grade, I went from Avram Mordechai to Avi Hoffman. And it was not a massive change, but people spoke to me differently. It was amazing. So people treat a person with a different name differently in some sense, but also it's the person saying the message that I'm trying to change, I'm trying to become a different person, and it's not sufficient. Rambam's not saying that all a person has to do is change their name, but it's part of the general process. The person should be engaging in lots of tzedakah. The person should even, Rambam says, go into galus, to wander around for a while, to go away, to wander away from their home, because that humbles the person. Should be engaging in lots of prayer. And just one of the ways of tshuva on top of that is also to change the name. That's what Rambam seems to be saying over there. Yeah. It could be just how you think of your name. Interesting. Yeah. It could be just how you think of your name and how you think of yourself. Correct. To think of yourself as a different person. And a lot of this really gets to the heart of that as well, because tshuva isn't only about getting the forgiveness of other people, getting the forgiveness of Hashem. It's also at some level about forgiving yourself, right? Of saying that, I know I did this really bad thing, but now I'm a new person. And Avi Hoffman of 2020 would have done X, Y, or Z, but Avi Hoffman of 2022 or 2023 would not have done the same thing. So I can work on forgiving myself for doing it back then, because now I know I'm genuinely a different person. And why should I keep beating myself up for something I would never do again? Right? So that's really important. Teshuvah is transformative, not only the way other people view us, but also the way we view ourselves. That's really part of this whole thing, very much so. Yeah, and making the connection with Hashem stronger. Absolutely. Hashem with other people, and also the way a person thinks of themselves. Okay, so if there are, thank you. I appreciate it. I thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and wish you all a Gemar Chasima Tova, and hopefully some of this resonated, and best of luck trying to engage in this process of tshuva, because it's a tough one, but it's really, really worthwhile to try to emerge as a different person. Tshuva means to return. To lashuv is to return. And so lashuv, I believe, means to return to a state of being where you were before you did the sin, before you could have even done the sin. Because we were all innocent at one point about everything. Everything we do, we're all innocent. So to return to that primal state of innocence where we can't do the sin, to me, that's what the word tshuva really means.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Okay. Lala tov, everyone. Chag sameach, shana tova. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.